There is a particular kind of embarrassment that happens when you put real effort into keeping something quiet, and the exact opposite occurs almost immediately. And that is roughly what unfolded last week when Meghan slipped back into Britain expecting the entire visit to stay genuinely contained, only to find the BBC and People magazine already running coverage within hours of her actual arrival on the ground.
I have a horrible feeling that we're seeing a breakdown in plain sight. I just, the movements, the way they move, the way they talk, so erratic.
One comment underneath that coverage summed up the irony better than any commentator managed. A meeting so private they apparently had to issue a press release to every major outlet on the planet just to announce it existed. Close to 900 people liked that specific comment. I want to work through this entire story in a specific and deliberate order, because I genuinely think the sequence here matters more than any single individual detail sitting inside it. Before we even get to the sequence of events, though, there is a separate question worth addressing directly. Who actually leaked news of this supposedly private visit in the first place? The palace denied being the source. Sussex representatives denied it too, just as firmly. But there is a precedent here that a lot of people following this story seem to have forgotten.
And you didn't prove your case. You had the opportunity to prove your case. You failed to do so. That's how the legal system works. Yes, no, he's never seen a situation in which he is not the victim, and he enjoys being the victim.
During an earlier and widely discussed palace leak, journalist Charlotte Griffiths later revealed publicly who had actually briefed her. And according to her own account, it was not palace staff at all, but Harry and Meghan's own PR team. Supporters of that reading point to a recognizable pattern. A story gets pushed out and promoted first, generating exactly the coverage intended, and only afterward does public frustration circle back and land on the king's staff as the presumed culprit. Critics looking at this latest leak say it reads like the exact same playbook running again. So let's start not with the visit itself, but with everything that happened in the 7 days leading up to it, because context changes how the whole thing reads. A full 7 days before Meghan's quiet return, Harry had already lost what a considerable number of commentators are now calling the defining legal battle of his entire adult life. His case against the Daily Mail's publisher. 400 pages of judgment and an outcome that did not go his way. The judge specifically flagged that portions of his argument leaned on assumption rather than solid evidence.
Meghan back on royal property.
Yeah, no one is as horrified as I am. I am curious to know your take here. There's two ways we can look at this, okay? I look at it appalled, because I feel like, in a way, it's giving Harry and Meghan exactly what they want, credibility. It erases the hurt that they've caused over the last 6 years. They've not said I'm sorry publicly.
What followed the ruling generated its own separate storm. Reported settlement talks that the Mail apparently declined before trial, according to Telegraph reporting, and then Harry's public statement afterward calling the verdict a whitewash. Lady Colin Campbell had a line for how the Mail handled the whole thing. They are very good, in her words, at staring you down. Costs on both sides were floated as high as $50 million combined, a figure alone significant enough that it would have comfortably dominated headlines for days, even without everything else that followed it. Lady Colin Campbell's specific characterization of the Mail's approach throughout the trial, that they are very good, in her words, at staring people down, captured something a lot of commentators picked up on afterward. This was not a newspaper that blinked under pressure, and its legal team reportedly challenged Harry's allegations point by point with a level of preparation that ultimately overwhelmed his own side's case. Then, exactly 3 days after that particular public statement went out, reports began emerging that Harry had sat down for tea with his own father at Highgrove. And that is genuinely where this story becomes considerably more interesting than a simple family reunion narrative, because of everything that reportedly happened around that meeting.
Harry and Meghan are desperate. They are trying to retrieve their situation sufficiently so that they will become bankable once more.
Let me lay out the actual logistics of the visit first, in order, because the specific details reportedly tell you something considerably more honest than the warm official framing being put out publicly. Harry had apparently expected to stay at Buckingham Palace, the way he reportedly had in the past. According to commentator Neil Sean, citing palace sources, what he actually got back was closer to a flat no. Sean's phrasing was that there was essentially no room at the inn. Harry ended up at a private members club instead. Windsor was never even on the table, according to several commentators including Sean, who claim William specifically did not want that arrangement happening. None of this has been confirmed officially, but it set a fairly cold tone before anyone had even sat down for tea. The meeting itself, according to separate accounts from both Lady Colin Campbell and Neil Sean, reportedly lasted under an hour in total, despite the genuinely long transatlantic journey involved in simply getting there for the family. Campbell's specific read was that serving tea signaled something deliberately brief and formal rather than emotionally significant.
Also been conditional, evidently, on no publicity, no, blah, 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 no leaking. Let's put it like that, no leaking. The last time there was leaking, they have evidently been informed that there can be no leaks, and if there are leaks, there will be consequences. And Harry and Meghan understand that they need the facade of reasonably good relations with the King and Queen.
No long conversation, no real heart-to-heart, just a controlled, contained encounter. Several other details have circulated about how it was structured. Phones reportedly collected from everyone beforehand for privacy and security reasons. Harry reportedly meeting Charles alone first while Meghan and the children waited separately. Camilla reportedly present throughout despite Harry having preferred she not be there, given the well-documented tension between them stemming partly from comments in his memoir. Supporters read her presence as loyalty to her husband. Others read it differently. Either way, it became one of the most discussed specific details of the whole encounter. Whatever photographs exist from the visit reportedly stay entirely under Crown control. Nothing headed for Netflix, nothing for social media. And according to Lady Colin Campbell, there was apparently a direct warning attached. Leak details from this meeting, and there would be real consequences. She called it the last chance saloon. On a lighter note, TalkSport's Robert Bell joked that at least everyone got proper Highgrove jam out of the visit, better, he quipped, than Meghan's own homemade version, a line that stuck with a lot of people through the week's coverage.
Fact is, they can pop in and have tea. I hope they had Highgrove jam, which is far better than the Meghan slop that she calls spread. So I got to taste what real produce tastes like from the Highgrove shop.
If this breakdown is useful, the like button helps this channel keep doing this kind of detailed work rather than just repeating headlines. Stick with me, because there is a comparison coming up that I think matters more than almost anything else in this story. Here is the specific part of this entire week that I genuinely think deserves the most careful attention out of everything we've covered so far, and it has essentially nothing to do with Highgrove directly. While Meghan was reportedly having tea with the king, a father on the other side of the world was being discussed in a completely different context. Thomas Markle spent years working long hours as a television lighting director and by multiple accounts poured meaningful time and money into his daughter's early career. Private schooling, acting classes, opportunities that a lot of people believe genuinely shaped the path that eventually led her into public life. He is in his 80s now, has survived heart attacks and a stroke, lost part of a leg, and has reportedly never once met his own grandchildren or Harry in person. Meghan reportedly flew more than 11 hours across an ocean specifically to see Harry's father this particular week. Thomas Markle, by comparison, lives roughly a 2-hour flight away from Montecito, a distance that would fit comfortably inside a single afternoon. That gap is the detail a lot of commentators keep returning to, and one comment captured the sentiment about as sharply as anything I have seen. One grandfather is a king. The other is a retired man with no title, and only one of them gets visited.
Said is exactly right. It's a complete breakdown of the marriage, of Harry's mental stability. Like nothing's working out for them. How can it? I mean, you just have ulterior motives to do things that you want and you're not getting it. And so you're losing your minds. Your lives are completely falling apart. It's going to get worse and worse. The more they try to brand and get out there to do all these different things to make money, the worse it's going to get.
Another commenter put it more bluntly still. They won't visit Thomas Markle because he isn't rich. A striking number of viewers, many describing their own experience with family estrangement as grandparents themselves, keep asking some version of the same question. What does it mean when support given for years simply stops being returned once health starts failing? Some royal commentators have gone further, raising a separate and quieter concern that Thomas Markle's own side of this entire story may simply never get properly heard if the current situation continues unchanged for much longer.
The country she claims she hates is a sign of defeat, and it is a sign that they are desperate and they do need money and they do need proximity to the British royal family so that they can try to attract new opportunities.
That's really true. So on the one hand, they've won because they're back on royal property. On the other hand, it's a mission of defeat that she tried to go it alone and be Meghan Inc., and it didn't work.
She would not be here if everything had, if she still had to record Confessions of a Female
true.
Founder, if she had a new season of With Love Meghan to shoot, if she was actually working on Meet Me at the Lake.
That remains speculation rather than anything confirmed, but it comes up often enough in this ongoing conversation that it deserves to be named directly rather than left implied. There is something genuinely uncomfortable about a story built so heavily around themes of family, healing, and second chances when one specific family member, an aging man managing serious health complications on his own, sits entirely outside that narrative, mentioned mostly in comparison to someone else's more photogenic reunion. Now, back to the palace side of this story, because William's position deserves its own attention separately from Harry's. Reports suggest William reportedly found out about the Highgrove meeting the exact same way the general public eventually did, through media coverage circulating publicly, rather than through any advance notice or heads up from within his own family, which is itself a fairly significant detail worth sitting with for a moment before moving past it. The timing made that worse rather than better. While Charles was reportedly meeting the Sussexes, William and Catherine were attending a charity polo event, carrying on with scheduled public duties as though nothing else was happening. Multiple reports describe William as genuinely caught off guard, and commentators continue to say he has no current appetite for any private meeting with his brother.
It'll be a private moment from the firm's point of view, but it might not be so private for Meghan and Harry. You just have to worry that this could be more material for another Netflix documentary or a future book.
Well, yes, that you've always got that sort of hanging over the royal family's head.
Part of that, critics argue, traces back to specific things Harry has said publicly about William over the years. The hair loss references in the memoir among them, compounded by online commentary from some Sussex supporters that added pressure during a period when Catherine was dealing with cancer treatment and needed space rather than scrutiny. But if you actually want the historical reference point that a genuinely large number of commentators keep circling back to throughout all of this ongoing commentary, it is not William at all. It is Queen Elizabeth herself, and specifically what she firmly established years earlier at the Sandringham Summit. No half-in, half-out arrangement of any kind. You were a working royal, or you were not one. Full stop. A lot of commentators are now openly asking whether this week's meeting represents a quiet departure from that line she drew so firmly. There is also the matter of who William reportedly holds specific grievances toward, beyond just the general strain that everyone already knows about. Critics point to particular details, Harry's references to William's hair loss in the memoir among them, as evidence of exactly the kind of casual, public cruelty that makes reconciliation considerably harder to imagine happening quickly, regardless of what Charles manages to arrange on his own end. There is a reason I keep coming back to Elizabeth in this specific context rather than treating her as a passing historical footnote. She was the one member of this family who consistently prioritized institutional coherence over individual comfort, even when that meant disappointing people she loved. The Sandringham line was not cruelty. By most accounts, it was an attempt to protect the very structure that makes any of this family's public role sustainable in the first place. Watching that specific line apparently soften, even slightly under a different king, raises questions that go well beyond any single family visit. The public reaction gives you a genuine sense of how divided this entire situation actually remains right now. One self-described lifelong monarchist, 72 years old, wrote that she no longer supports the monarchy after this. Another comment, considerably sharper, argued Charles was being reckless given everything Harry and Meghan reportedly put Elizabeth and Philip through before their deaths. That comment alone drew roughly 400 agreements. People still remember Philip's final months, the pandemic-era funeral, the years of interviews and public accusations that unfolded while Elizabeth was still alive. One commenter used the phrase elderly abusers, clearly an opinion rather than established fact, and still picked up hundreds of supportive replies. Some Australian commenters said this development has made them genuinely question the Commonwealth's future. There were also reports of scattered booing as the Sussexes arrived, though accounts of the crowd's mood vary. One especially blunt three-word summary made the rounds: "The king got Markled." If this breakdown is giving you the full picture rather than just the headline version, the like button genuinely helps this channel reach more people looking for exactly this kind of detail. Stay with me, because the theory about what actually triggered this meeting is genuinely one of the more interesting threads in the entire story. So why did this specific meeting actually happen now, after such a long and apparently deliberate stretch of distance between father and son? Neil Sean has a specific theory, and it does not center on Harry at all. According to Sean, Meghan personally called the palace the night before, explaining that Harry was deeply shaken by the court ruling and needed to speak with his father urgently. And that call, in Sean's account, is what actually moved things forward. Neil Sean's theory, if accurate, reframes the entire meeting in a way worth sitting with. It suggests Charles's apparent willingness to open the door was less about his own initiative and considerably more about responding to a direct, urgent appeal from Meghan specifically, a woman who, throughout most of this saga, has been positioned publicly as reluctant to engage with the institution at all. If she really did make that call, it complicates the simpler narrative where Harry alone drives every decision about reconciliation and Meghan simply follows along or stays away. Set that account against something PR expert Jackie Vore separately said this same week, in comments that generated their own considerable wave of attention. "I have a horrible feeling that we're seeing a breakdown in plain sight." Vore pointed to a consistent pattern of shifting public messaging, plans that seem to change from one statement to the next without real explanation, and described Harry's reaction to unfavorable coverage as something close to throwing his toys out of the pram. Megyn Kelly went considerably further still in her own separate commentary, calling Harry simply and directly wrong about the entire court case, and describing what she specifically termed a sick sense of paranoia running consistently through his public statements throughout the whole ordeal. She argued that a campaign genuinely centered on honoring his mother would look considerably different from years spent litigating against newspapers, and separately dismissed the widely reported New York car chase as exaggerated relative to what actually happened. Evidence in her framing of a broader pattern where ordinary events get inflated into major controversies. There is one specific detail threading consistently through the entire court case and everything that followed it. Meghan was reportedly never once seen standing publicly beside Harry at any appearance directly connected to the proceedings, from the opening of the trial through to the final verdict and its aftermath. That absence has fed real speculation that the couple may simply disagree on how to handle these legal fights, with some claiming Meghan grew tired of the lawsuits years before Harry did. None of that is confirmed, but it is exactly why some commentators have started asking, more openly than before, how much longer this marriage actually holds. That pattern of absence deserves its own moment of attention, separate from the divorce speculation it eventually feeds into. Whatever the explanation turns out to be, genuine disagreement over strategy, a scheduling coincidence repeated often enough to stop looking coincidental, or something considerably more serious sitting underneath the surface. The optics of it have shaped how this entire month has been read by commentators and casual observers alike. A wife's absence during her husband's worst public week in years is the kind of detail that people notice even when they cannot fully explain what it means. Publishing insiders have also speculated separately that any Meghan memoir released after a divorce could command a genuinely enormous deal. Figures as high as $50 to $60 million have circulated among industry commentators, though those numbers remain firmly in speculation territory with nothing close to confirmed. There is a specific theory behind a genuinely significant portion of that broader speculation, sometimes referred to in shorthand as the 10-year rule. The idea that marriage length matters under California law for certain divorce proceedings, and the Sussexes have been California residents since roughly 2020. Commentators including Kinsey Schofield have floated what that timeline might eventually mean. Though there is no actual evidence any separation is being planned. Related speculation includes whether Meghan could keep using the Duchess of Sussex title, even after any divorce under current royal convention. In much the same way, Sarah Ferguson kept using the Duchess of York title for years following her own separation. Pure speculation at every stage of this, but the kind of detail that keeps circulating persistently regardless of how little evidence actually supports it. Looking further ahead, There is already talk circulating about a possible Balmoral invitation arriving later this summer, alongside separate speculation about where Christmas might be spent this year, potentially at Sandringham. Some reports specifically suggest that William and Catherine would choose to skip the traditional Christmas walk entirely, a genuinely visible and heavily photographed annual tradition if the Sussexes were to join it, a decision that would itself become a major story regardless of the reasoning behind it. None of that is officially confirmed either, and it may simply be the natural churn of speculation that fills the gap whenever this family goes quiet for even a short stretch. But given Lady Colin Campbell's specific warning about what leaking any details from Highgrove could genuinely cost this family going forward, and given this particular couple's well-documented and extensive history with books, documentaries, and tell-all interviews stretching back years, a considerable number of people are watching closely and skeptically to see whether that specific warning actually holds up over time, or whether it becomes one more boundary that eventually gets tested and crossed the way previous boundaries reportedly have been. There is something worth naming plainly here before we close. Every single element of this story, the quiet arrival that became global news, the tea that lasted less than an hour, the phones collected at the door, the warning about consequences, describes an institution that has learned, through hard and repeated experience, to treat every interaction with the Sussexes as a potential leak waiting to happen. That is not how families that trust each other operate. It is how organizations manage risk. Whether that caution is fully justified by the historical record, or whether it has become its own kind of self-fulfilling coldness, is a genuinely fair question to sit with. What you actually have here, once you strip away the individual headlines and lay everything out in the order it genuinely happened, is one extraordinarily dense and eventful week. A quiet visit that became global news within hours despite every apparent effort to keep it contained. A brother relationship that shows no meaningful sign of thawing, regardless of what happens between Harry and their father individually. And an aging father who, by every available account, is still genuinely hoping for something real and lasting with a son he currently only gets to see for less than an hour at a stretch, under conditions that read considerably more like a managed diplomatic encounter than a family reunion in any ordinary sense of that phrase. Sit with the specific detail of the phones being collected for a moment, because I think it captures something the rest of the story only implies. A family that trusted each other would not need that measure. An institution managing a known risk absolutely would. Whichever one this actually was, and it may well have been some uneasy combination of both, the fact that precaution was apparently built into the meeting from the very start tells you something honest about where things currently stand, whatever the warmer version of events being circulated afterward would prefer you to believe. What is your honest take on all of this? Did this specific meeting mark genuine movement toward real reconciliation between Harry and his father? Or was it a carefully controlled, tightly managed performance built specifically to look like considerably more than it actually was to anyone watching from the outside? And separately, does the Thomas Markle comparison change how you personally read the warmth being projected around this entire visit? Or do you think the two situations are simply too different to compare fairly? Tell me honestly in the comments because I genuinely want to know where people are landing on this one. Subscribe if you want the next update on this story the moment it actually lands rather than days later, and I will see you in the next one.